Well, hey there, folks. Thanks for joining me today. It's Simeon with you. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Well, I wanted to do a short update about the drone, quote unquote, situation that's been happening over the United States, especially over New Jersey, in the past couple weeks and even months. I had a chance to talk to someone from Morristown, which is the central area where a lot of this drone activity has been happening. And, some of her observations are very interesting about what she saw. She described two different sizes of objects. One larger size that she described the size of a car, like a sedan-sized car flying higher up. And she also described smaller objects that she said were going back and forth over her street all night. You've heard that these show up between 5 and 11 p.m. Well, she said hers were there after 11 p.m. They were there into the early hours of the morning. And she said she could hear sounds from it. It made a slight whirring sound. I also talked to another witness the other day in the Oradell area, and she described with her husband seeing some of these objects sort of hovering over their neighborhood. And she also described a slight whirring sound. So I think this is interesting because if you look at the discussion about this subject over the past couple days, there is a lot of confusion, especially at the national federal level. There's simply a lot of different messages coming from representatives of the federal government. There have been people that have been attempting to explain it away as just, hobbyist drones, law enforcement drones, things like this. And I think one of the funniest explanations I've heard was a former FAA administrator saying that he thought this was the result of it being the holiday season where people get gifts. And these were people who got their gifts ahead of time, and a lot of people got drones. And this person was being serious. And so that's what we're seeing. But obviously, this is not the explanation for the vast majority of what people are seeing, or even most of it. Because when you listen to what the officials from New Jersey are telling us, just that one area alone, if we focus on that for a moment, the mayors of the town, state police, other types of law enforcement, and congressional representatives from New Jersey, many of whom have seen these objects close up, they tell us that these are groups of these objects, that they're very large, as we heard, and there's just no possible way these are civilian type objects. Even law enforcement objects. And the reason is they seem to stay up for 6 or 7 hours continuously at a time. In a previous video, I showed some New York witnesses who photographed them. You can take a look at that video where they described what they looked like from a distance over the Hudson River area from their home. It's pretty clear we're dealing with very large objects that have an unconventional technology to them, which is they're just much larger than what we think of as drones. They seem more like, aircraft of some type, rotor type vehicles, more in the helicopter direction, but they're really too big to be conventionally described as drones, especially because they don't seem to be susceptible to the type of EM countermeasures that we are told the military has employed to attempt to neutralize these objects, and it doesn't seem to affect them. Now, I know this is a very complex subject because we're dealing with incidents all over the world, and so we're not really sure. Are we dealing with one type of object, or are there multiple types of actors and phenomena going on at the same time? But when we look at the technology just for around the New Jersey area, for example, it doesn't seem to be something that you and I can buy off the shelf. So these arguments from the federal government, FAA administrators, that these are misidentifications of conventional drone objects doesn't make any sense, because as you and I know, do some research. If you've been around drones, they don't really stay up longer than half an hour at most under circumstances where there's no wind or anything and they're just hovering. Normally, it's more like 20 minutes. So these are some other types of objects, and that leads you to the question, well, are they extraterrestrial objects? Are they UFOs? I mean, UFOs, UAP, in the sense we've been using them to describe something way beyond our level of technology. And I think it's pretty clear that we're having a Sputnik moment right now, that we are dealing with an advanced technology. But it doesn't seem to me necessarily extraterrestrial. And the reason is these objects don't display, from what I've seen and from the witnesses I've talked to, any of the 5 observables directly. In other words, the 5 observables are these characteristics, I believe, that the UAP task force came up with. Jay Stratton talked about it at the Phenomicon conference in Vernal, Utah earlier this year. We don't see that sort of effect where you have this sort of instantaneous acceleration. And if you have some videos that you think show the opposite, feel free to share those. They don't show the instantaneous acceleration we normally associate with UFO, UAPs. We don't have any evidence yet that I know of that shows that they're transmedium, capable of transmedium travel, which would mean they can go from the water to air to space, something like that. They've been seen over the water. I'm not sure there's evidence yet that they're coming out of the water. The other 5 observables, like hypersonic travel, I don't think we've seen them move fast enough to know if they would leave a sonic boom or not. And if you'll remember, I saw that strange sort of plane type object that you might have seen videos of that has a lot of lights under the cockpit and kind of like these strips that just do not look like any aircraft I've ever seen before. And, I've had a chance to look at a couple aircraft. This is my video from a couple days ago. I've had a chance to look at a couple aircraft that were approaching local airports since then. And I would say that this was a very low flying plane-like object at about 1,000 feet. But it was just flying straight and level, and it had lights that just did not seem to me to be FAA standard lights, very bright lights, not just spotlights and so forth like you see on aircraft. Even the center red strobe did not seem like other red strobes I've seen before. And what's a plane like that doing over Paterson, New Jersey at straight and level flight, just 1,000 miles up at such a slow speed? This object, though, when it made a turn, it wasn't instantaneous 90-degree turn like we often associate with UFOs and UAP. It was kind of more of a gradual 90-degree turn, but it was a lot sharper than you would expect from a plane, which normally when it makes a turn is going to use up a lot of sky. Even at 100 knots, it's going to use up some sky to make that turn. This just kind of started to turn, and all of a sudden it was going 90 degrees. But it wasn't like an instantaneous, like a Tic Tac type 90-degree turn from the 2004 Tic Tac incident. So what my feeling about this is, the other side, by the way, of the federal government's arguments when you listen to incoming President-elect Donald Trump at one of his press conferences recently said, they know what they are. Federal government knows what they are, but for some reason they don't want to talk yet. But I'm canceling my visit to Bedminster, to my properties in Bedminster, over the weekend because of this. And we've had these no-fly zones imposed and so forth. So my feeling about this is that this is a new type of breakthrough technology, a Sputnik moment like the U.S. had in 1957, where the Soviets sent Sputnik over the U.S., and we can see it, and we don't have anything like that type of satellite technology yet. It is an advanced technology, but it doesn't seem to me advanced enough to be extraterrestrial, in my humble opinion. So where does that leave us? What types of technology do we know about that could be like that? And I think one big candidate here is cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction. This is a type of technology that we've heard about for decades, and I think has really been not really fairly treated by the media, just like the UFO subject, for example, and other types of science topics. It hasn't really been fairly discussed, because we know if we look at the history of this subject matter ever since Fleischmann and Pons and so forth, there have been a lot of labs and folks that have reproduced the Fleischmann and Pons effect for periods of time. Not that it's been turned into a sustainable reactor that can just go for hours and hours like a car engine or something like that. But I've heard witnesses and folks tell us, Vittorio Violante, for example, from ENEA, the energy lab, government energy lab in Italy, told us way back in 2015 at the SSE meeting in San Francisco that they had reproduced the Fleischmann and Pons effect for moments of time, that it was a real resonance effect that produced excess heat. And another example is this company in Kyiv, Ukraine, Proton 21 Labs, Stanislav Adamenko and Vladimir Vysotsky, who had done, we're told, 10,000 successful cold fusion LENR type experiments, maybe something like 6,000 man hours or something like this. And they were so good at it that they were inspected and tested, I believe, by the Department of Energy. There were experiments done proving this from 2015 to 2017, and then the DOE just simply buys the company and moves them to the United States, and the whole project goes dark. What Proton 21 Labs was involved with was showing you could use cold fusion type LENR reactions to neutralize harmful radioactive wastes, transmute elements from one periodic element to another, and have a way of just safely disposing of radioactive waste. And they were able to show that they were able to actually do this type of transmutational alchemy, which we've always been told is something like from fiction or something like this, even though we know Isaac Newton was interested in this. This is one of the effects of the LENR process, is to transmute chemical elements, even heavy elements, into lighter, neutral, harmless elements. And this is probably the interest of the DOE in this Proton 21 Labs. So we could go on and on all day about the different labs and institutions that have successfully shown that the LENR, as it was used to be called cold fusion reaction, it's not literally cold fusion, but this low energy nuclear reaction is a real effect. So I would place my bets that what we're seeing in this quote unquote UAS drone technology is someone has actually successfully turned it into a type of engine for a vehicle like this, which is why they can stay aloft for so many hours. Because the alternatives to batteries that we know about for this type of technology, we've heard about the other day, the police in Brooklyn seized a drone from the Navy shipyards there that was, I think, created by the Amegy company, which was experimental drones based on ammonia. And then there were some other examples recently we've heard about where a company was using just pure hydrogen to fuel a craft. And these were experimental and could stay aloft for 2 to 4 hours. But no one's been able to show us any technology that can stay aloft for 6 or 7 hours. And I don't think the battery technology exists yet for something to be able to do that for objects that are the size and weight of a small car. So you remember, some of these objects have been described, these so-called drone objects, some of them have been described as being as long as 20 feet long. So these are large objects, and I would say that the reason there's so much secrecy around it is that since the federal government has been telling us these are not dangerous and they're not military vehicles and they're not our foreign adversaries, then it's some other agency that's non-military, Department of Energy, an intelligence agency, or private company that has been able to produce a new type of breakthrough technology based on the LENR process, and they're showing it off. And that would be my feeling about what's possible. The idea that our federal government here in the US does not know what's flying around in the skies, I don't I don't believe that. And simply because in Dark Matter Monsters, I wrote about having a discussion with a former Department of Defense official, page 92, who told me that even back in the 1960s, they detected one town in the Midwest that had a complete collapse of its electromagnetic field, and nothing electrical or magnetic worked for about a day in that town. And they knew this remotely. It's not like they were there in the town, and they didn't contact the town, but he told me they were able to perceive this remotely with their technology. So if this technology existed in the 60s to detect electromagnetic collapses in one part of the United States, by the way, they weren't sure what actually caused it. Some candidates could have been a hovering UFO in the area. I don't know, maybe a small black hole coming into the atmosphere and going through that area or something like that. You can kind of use your imagination what could cause a collapse of the electromagnetic field. But I think I would say that if we knew what they were in the 60s, we could detect this. Certainly, 60 years later, we should be able to tell objects that come night after night to see where they're going, where they're coming from, and so forth. So it seems to me some of the secrecy here is coming from the federal government. And I think President-elect Trump's statements support that idea. So my candidate is cold fusion LENR. If you think there's another power source at work here, I'm open to hearing your suggestions. But again, I think it points to the idea that there is some sort of technological breakthrough here. And the evidence for that would also be some of the strange electromagnetic effects that people have reported around these drones. You remember some of these witnesses a couple of weeks ago said that one of these objects went over their car and their clock briefly changed time. And then to the wrong time, when the object left, their clock went back to the right time. And another person said, I think I've heard two people say this, they sent their own personal drone up to be next to a clump of these vehicles. One of these guys was near the Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey. And he said his battery went to zero in a few seconds and his drone fell out of the sky. So that does not sound to me like any ordinary technology. People have suggested that these drones have the capacity to neutralize batteries, but it might be the effect of whatever is on board the craft as its technology to create non-ordinary electromagnetic fields. Something that I've personally seen time and time again, yes, in crop circles over in the UK and some in the US, where we had our batteries drain and our cameras stop working, and other strange electromagnetic effects near crop circles, which I think has something to do with what's called the Aharonov-Bohm effect. And we can talk about that another time. But are these drones using that as some sort of anti-drone countermeasure, or is it an effect of their technology, which is why it would affect clocks and things like that get near them? So I think that sort of evidence indicates we're dealing with a new type of technology and something in the LENR family. Now, there's a lot of evidence that cold fusion LENR type reactors have strange EM effects. But just for a recent example, take a listen to Bob Grenier here of the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, talking about how when he was around the John Hutchinson effect, which is a cold fusion type LENR reaction in metals that weakens them and causes them to soften at room temperatures. He had some computer laptops, batteries go out, and some other effects. Take a listen.
Where the second laptop was, which is the one I'm speaking to you on now, which, by the way, it and a second laptop that was within that non-radiating boundary both lost the ability to charge. In fact, they had zero charge on the battery, but after about 4 or 5 hours, they got back the ability to charge. So the two laptops did this, and my head in that area was like, it was really unpleasant to be in that zone. But it was actually worse than the feeling that I got before 2 lightning storms. So whatever was going on in that zone affected me physically, mentally, and 2 laptops in that zone.
Now, it's interesting to listen to Bob Grenier talk about some of these strange physiological and electronic effects being around these non-ordinary EM fields. Other cold fusion LENR researchers like Jean-Paul Barbarian have also mentioned feeling strange effects in their labs while some of these experiments were running. Barbarian mentioned feeling that the lab got suddenly cold when he turned one of these cold fusion LENR reactors on. So it's just an interesting parallel there, don't you think, between some of these effects that people are seeing around the drones and what some of these LENR researchers are saying. So in any case, I personally have never seen the federal government so confused about something. The messaging coming from them is really strange. And the last time this happened, I'm just going to bring this up as a previous example. Roswell, yes, 1947. What was the first announcement from the Roswell Army Air Base, from the press officer there in 47, that they had captured a flying saucer? And then just a few hours later, they changed their tune and say, no, it was a weather balloon. And then decades later, we're told it wasn't weather balloons. It was these mogul nuclear test listening balloons that were run out of NYU and were launched over that area to listen for explosions from nuclear testing and so forth. We've seen this before where the message simply changed in 24 hours. Yes, and it was in Roswell over 70 years ago. So, and Roswell, those were not flaky people that didn't know what they were talking about. It was the only nuclear qualified U.S. military base at the time where the flights against Nagasaki and Hiroshima were launched from. These people were handpicked and they knew what they were doing. So to me, this sort of indicates the same sort of confusion, is that when you're coming up against a new technology and you really can't identify it very easily. So those are my thoughts about it. I'm curious to your ideas. Feel free to put them in the box below. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Take care for now and bye.